I think really SpaceX should go public on the Martian stock market once they arrive there. That I think would work out well for them. Maybe you could report earnings every 6 months on the Martian stock market. We'll have to see.
Welcome to the Gigacast. My name is Gav, here with Omar, Sawyer, and Farzad. And today we're going to space. Talking a little bit about SpaceX to kick things off. There's so many questions that people have around a potential IPO, the company, the business. Sawyer, why don't you kick us off with your insights?
Yeah, sure. So I've probably gotten thousands of DMs over the years, and certainly every week asking, how do I buy SpaceX shares? When is SpaceX going to IPO? Because retail shareholders, they don't really have access. So I figured we could maybe go through some maybe scenarios for and against SpaceX IPOing. And some of the reasons I sort of came up with was, one, obviously a lot of companies IPO to raise capital. But SpaceX doesn't really need that. Liquidity for shareholders, founders, early investors, they can sell shares, realizing returns on their investment. But also you can sometimes get better loan and financing opportunities. Like public companies often have access to better borrowing terms due to, increased transparency and valuation. But honestly, I don't really see that as an issue for Elon because he has really good connections in cloud, especially with Morgan Stanley. And like I said, access for retail shareholders, by and large, retail shareholders have really no way of buying SpaceX stock unless they go through an SPV or some fund. And both of those typically have really high fees. And, we know Elon appreciates retail shareholders. They're often the most feisty and they fight for him. Like I said, I've gotten a lot of DMs over the years from retail shareholders wanting to buy SpaceX stock. And the other thing for an IPO would be, there's limits of a private valuation. SpaceX is currently valued at $350 billion, I think. And their most recent secondary round was oversubscribed, even at that valuation. And I'm not really sure how high a valuation will go before investors start wanting to, take profits. At some point, you want to make money on your investment. But at that point,
are they the most valuable private company in the world?
So ByteDance was equally, I think, at 300 billion, but
you're telling me it's not Chick-fil-A?
It's what?
You're telling me it's
Chick-fil-A?
not Chick-fil-A?
Definitely not Chick-fil-A. Yeah, so I think SpaceX is the most highly valued private company in the world now. It jumped from 210 billion in the fall of last year to 350 in December. So it's probably even going to go higher in the next few months.
Confirmed.
Yeah.
Wow. So double OpenAI.
But SpaceX hasn't raised money in years. I don't know if you guys know this, but all their rounds have been secondary rounds or opportunities for existing shareholders to sell their shares. And SpaceX has been buying back their own shares for a while now, which tells me that, they're in a good financial position, but also that Starlink is generating enough cash to fund their growth.
Do we know, I know they're private, obviously it's going to be tough to understand this, but is there what percentage of their cash flow is from Starlink versus the Falcon program?
They haven't really broken that out. I know Gwen did share that Starlink itself is now profitable as of last year, but yeah, that's the thing with a private company. We don't really get this insight, and even investors that go into special purpose vehicles or SPVs that invest through that vehicle, they don't even really get transparency into the financials.
I wonder what Grok would say if you asked it to, there we go, break down the percentages. Yeah, not public. Okay.
Honestly, I think those are just from studies or analysis or research reports from third parties that don't really have any insight themselves. But
roughly 55 to 60% is the estimate there.
Okay.
But then they're go ahead.
Yeah. No, please.
Well, I want to get to the points against, but let's go to your point first.
No, I literally, I don't even remember what I was going to say. Go ahead.
Okay. A few points against I can think of. There is some level of loss of control. Once you're public, a company must answer to shareholders, and CEOs may lose some decision-making power, although that doesn't really tend to be an issue with Elon companies. You got regulatory and compliance costs, although that's not really a huge deal. Market pressure, short-term focus. Investors typically want quarterly earnings growth, and that can push a company to prioritize short-term gains over long-term strategy. And we all know that Elon's companies are very long-term focused, especially SpaceX. And the last point would be, market volatility, I guess. Tesla stock is notoriously volatile. And so is really emotionally driven stock and short-term driven. And it creates a lot of chaos, which is something that I don't think Elon likes. And I will say Tesla's shareholder case out of Delaware, Elon's compensation case, I think has potentially influenced Elon's thinking into IPOing SpaceX long-term, depending on how the outcome goes down.
That's a great point.
But because this is a real risk that was presented to Tesla long-term shareholders that we didn't really see coming, right? And there was a potential to Elon lose a lot of money, a lot of voting access. And there was some speculation of like whether he would potentially leave Tesla if he didn't, win that vote. So for Elon, it's like, well, if I don't take SpaceX public, I'm not going to have these type of shareholder lawsuits come at me from, these predatory law firms wanting to make money off of small shareholders. So, yeah, those are sort of some of the thoughts.
Well, I think what's interesting, the Delaware point is a brilliant one. I do think there's still they're going through the appeal process. I know they're doing an amicus brief, with the original pay. I saw that McCormick in Delaware, the judge that ruled against the pay when she rescinded it, she said that the move to Texas was legal because shareholders voted on moving to Texas. I'm like, okay, shareholders voted for the compensation twice, but okay, we'll put that aside. We'll let that go through the process. So I think the appeal process might remove that as a potential risk. But I think what's interesting from like SpaceX going public versus Tesla, I think Tesla has had a very unique set of circumstances because the auto market is so entrenched. I think a lot of the investor base didn't understand, at least. I think that has changed quite a bit since IPO for Tesla. They didn't truly understand the disruption that was happening in the automotive sector. They didn't really view autonomous vehicles long term as a viable business model. They didn't view electric vehicles as a viable business model because it was always thought as the more expensive drivetrain versus the gas one, where it has decades of a supply chain built up and manufacturing capacity and all that stuff. That has changed. In the case of SpaceX, I mean, who is SpaceX's competitor? Like they are basically. They have created a market for themselves, and it's all because of reusable rocket technology. Starlink is possible because of reusable rocket technology. They have an enormous moat when it comes to the space business. Now there are other players like your Fireflies and your what's the other guy? I know Matt Smith really likes this one. I forget. Rocket Labs is another one. There are other startup space companies that have a lot of promise. Innovation
Blue
design
Origin too, Jeff Bezos.
Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic once upon a time, right? So I think, and then if you view it within the context of let's say the current administration and any future ones start creating an environment for space manufacturing to come to the United States and actually try to spool up entrepreneurship and business creation. The space frontier is one that is ripe for all kinds of, just for it to actually be birthed, not even disruption. It doesn't really exist, asteroid
Yeah, we should
mining.
also specify that it wouldn't be like SpaceX itself that would probably IPO. It would be Starlink. It'd be the spinoff. But most of the value, I think, in SpaceX is Starlink.
That's kind of what I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on. It is the two different pieces there within the IPO.
I don't know. I feel like the rocket business. I think we might be for sure going to Mars is going to be a gigantic money suck for sure. But I think and this is very loose and not at all well thought out. But I find it hard to believe that there wouldn't be some sort of viable business case for the rocket side of the equation on Earth or even nearby. Space tourism. Again, could we mine on Mars or on the moon rather and bring stuff? Are there some materials there that we can use on Earth, so on and so forth? It's definitely interesting. I think in the short to medium term, Starlink is by far the most valuable. Like when I say short to medium term, next 5 to 10 years. But I do think from a long term perspective, space feels giant. I mean, that's in so many different ways.
I think there's a lot more to go down on the space side. Before we go into that, Omar, what do you think on the IPO side of things?
Well, in terms of SpaceX IPOing, I see all negatives and no positives. Because as Sawyer pointed out, they don't need to raise capital. They're making billions of dollars from Starlink and their launch services. Yeah. Meanwhile, when you go public, you've now got quarterly earnings reporting. You've got the stock moving up and down anytime anything happens. There's a launch and the rocket explodes or something. Now the stock is tanking. Businesses that are well suited to go public are typically businesses that have predictable earnings and growth. And SpaceX, they're trying to get to Mars. That's the focus. They're trying to build a business here. And I don't think it's really in their interest to have people looking at quarterly earnings. I mean, it's so arbitrary. What did you earn from January to March? Well, what if there's some satellite or some launch that isn't going to be ready until the summer? I think Tesla being public has been a pain in the ass in many ways. You've also, of course, got shareholder lawsuits. When you have a few large shareholders, you're unlikely to see frivolous shareholder lawsuits. But when anyone can be a shareholder, anyone with 9 shares, for example, then you do waste a lot more time in litigation, expensive litigation, which frankly, they don't need to do because they have all the capital they need to sustain themselves. So you're seeing this trend where more and more companies are staying private longer. You look at Stripe, you have these sort of mega unicorns that never go public. And honestly, it's a shame for public investors. I think what we really need in this country is reform of the requirements for going public and for shareholder litigation so that more companies can go public and retail investors have access to this as opposed to just large venture capital investors. And I mean, this is Elon Musk we're talking about. He has no problem raising capital in the private market if he needs to. Now, in terms of Starlink, if they were to IPO, if they did need outside capital, that's obviously probably the way they do it. And I think they've talked about this before. Starlink, the best estimates I've seen is about $8 billion out of SpaceX's $13 billion in revenue. So Starlink is now bigger, by the estimates I've seen, than the launch services business. And I think the potential of that business is also much bigger long term. So if they were to IPO to raise capital, I think the way they probably would do it is to spin Starlink out as a separate business, IPO that out. There you're actually going to have pretty predictable earnings and growth because people are subscribed. They're not going to cancel their subscription month to month. And so you're going to be able to show pretty predictable revenue and earnings growth. So at the time that they want to do that, I would think it would happen in the form of a Starlink IPO. But I'm not sure there's a pressing need to do that at this moment. Maybe as they gear up more to Mars missions, we see that happen.
Yeah, I think those are such excellent points. The forcing function to go public is like non-existent for a well-running business, for a self-sustaining business. There's literally none. I think one of the ideas that I heard before about creating a better environment for the public market for companies to want to go public is shifting the earnings to be reported yearly instead of quarterly. I love that idea in a lot of different ways. And then maybe you can put in a clause that says if there is seriously, serious downward guidance that needs to, you can put a clause that says, hey, if you think there's seriously material downward guidance that needs to go out to the market, then you can say, hey, by the way, here we're guiding towards this for a yearly. Maybe that's part of the law that says, I don't know, your earnings might go down by more than 25% or something. You predict. You have to put it out of notice so that investors know that, right? I think that will change a lot of the dynamics in the public sector because you're no longer guiding on a per quarter basis. You're guiding on a yearly basis. And that really allows a business to get much closer to building a strategy for the long-term success of the company versus trying to constantly worry about the short term. It's like, okay, how can I ensure my investor base doesn't dump next quarter and then stay out of the news cycle? The media will lose big time because, you're not going to get your quarterly streams. You're not going to get your quarterly hit piece. You're not going to get your quarterly blah, blah, blah. But I think long-term business strategy will then be rewarded. And then that will be the forcing function for actually following and investing in a company. But outside of that, yeah.
Can you imagine the reactions that you would have that one day of the year when
I know
people
it would
actually
be
get earnings?
It would be amazing.
40% moves.
It would be amazing, right? I think it really would make from a TV perspective, like all of us are in media now, like it would be great. I think it kind of creates this like a New Year's vibe. It's like, bro, we haven't heard from Elon on a call or Satya on a call.
Once a year, I feel like it's a bit much. Maybe like once every 6 months or something.
Yeah, I
more than a quarter.
Once a year.
I think quarter is too short.
It's funny when you guys talk about how easy it is for Elon to raise capital, because that's just like the big thing, right? That people go to IPO for, because you're bringing a ton of regulations and details on yourself. And so usually you're doing it to raise capital. I don't know if, Evan, you could pull this up, but there's that text conversation when Elon was buying Twitter, where he's texting with, who is it? One of the co-founders of Google, maybe?
Larry Ellison, I think.
Yeah, maybe it's Larry Ellison. And he's like, hey, I'm, buying Twitter. You want to put some in? And he goes,
I'm good for $1 billion.
He goes, I'm good for $1 billion.
Hey, bro, you want to throw in $1 billion? Yeah, that's how he raises
Elon's
capital.
like, I recommend $2 billion, as a starting point. Go from there.
And things
Amazing.
were very different in 2010 when Tesla was raising capital to build the Model S. That required a serious amount of capital they don't have. In terms of SpaceX, does anyone really care what SpaceX's earnings are? Does it really matter if they turned a profit this quarter? I mean, if you're faced with a choice where, okay, should we spend to expedite, let's say a new order of steel or some more workers to try and get Starship up faster, but then we swing into a loss for the quarter? I mean, who even wants to worry about that, whether they swing into a loss for the quarter or not? What matters for the company is, are they getting this done and building the long-term business here? And I do think that public markets can often distract management from what's really key to the business.
So they're valuing this. I mean, what's Tesla's valuation back to right now? Because it's come down 30% already this year.
850,
So
I think, 900, something.
still up there? Okay, I thought it was a little bit
875.
lower. What are we at? So 875.
850.
So they're saying that right now, Tesla's worth less than 3 times as more than SpaceX and Starlink right now, right? They're
Yeah, 3 times the
350
valuation.
billion.
2.5.
2.5 times. So I think maybe Tesla gets a lot of hype, a lot more hype than these other companies. It's just, I guess we don't have a deep look inside the box of revenue and all these other items to really extrapolate out, but they have to share that information somewhat, right? Because they have done these private rounds.
Yeah, but I think the other point stand is like when Tesla IPO'd, they IPO'd because they needed the cash. They needed. You have to remember, this was 2010. When did Tesla IPO? 2010, 2011, something like that. Yeah, this is 2 years after the Great Recession. The auto market was in shambles, and Elon and Tesla were able to get Numni on like a pennies on the dollar. That's where they started. The Toyota GM partnership, was it? I think in California. I think they bought it for $50 million or something. I forget the number. It was ridiculously low. $50 million for a 9 million square foot facility, whatever it is, in California. That's insanity, right? But that opportunity gave him the ability to say, okay, now we got to fill this shit with a bunch of machines. Oh, wow, we need billions of dollars. We should probably go public, right? I think that's the equation that was there for them to go public. But again, the SpaceX thing, it's like, even if you look at it from a valuation perspective, like what's the forcing function? They're self-sustaining. You don't deal with any other garbage that goes around with it. The CEO is a magnet for attention, positive and negative. Like, just let Gwen and team go to work. Let them cook, right? And that's exactly what's been happening. They're in the shadows. Yeah. Nobody's paying attention, really, that shouldn't be paying attention or would want to pay attention. They're just working. And they can be as fast as possible. They can move fast and break things. Nobody needs to pay attention. They have a mission. They go, right? And we see it with Tesla. Like, when they move fast and break things, they're still doing it, but man, doesn't get a lot of attention. SpaceX gets to do the same exact thing, and they get all the benefits from being private. Just look at X as another perfect example. Triple the profitability or whatever of Twitter, whatever it was, 80% job losses. You can't do that if you're a public company. But you can do it when you're a private company. You get a lot less attention, and you're able to move a lot faster and make much more sweeping change and really plan for the future a lot easier.
One benefit that going public does bring to the company, I think, is offering liquidity for employees. And they've been able to do this through secondaries, but it's obviously much easier if an employee who's paid in equity can just go and sell it on the open market anytime they need to. But, I think really SpaceX should go public on the Martian stock market once they arrive there.
Ooh.
That I think would work out well for them.
Say more. Like what's the like that actually sounds like a thing.
Yeah, so maybe you could report earnings every 6 months on the Martian stock market. We'll have to see.
Yeah.
How long is a year on Mars?
What's right now?
Evan, how long is a year on Mars?
Yeah, look that up. How long is Mars? And also, what do you guys think right now is a realistic timeline for humans on Mars?
Like mid 2030s.
Year on Mars.
Slightly
about
slower.
2 years. About 2 years on Earth.
Oh, twice so long. Okay.
Perfect. So then
Report
the quarter's
yearly.
already 6 months.
There you go. There you go. So you can do quarterly, and a quarterly will be 6 months. It's solved.
6 months.
So that's easier there on Mars. Okay, very interesting. As I think through this, I think we've talked a lot about the potential for an IPO and why they're probably not going to IPO in the near future. But just deeper into the company, how does this stack up for you guys against something like Tesla? Where Tesla, we've gone through in the last several episodes so many segments of Optimus and FSD and all these potential pieces. For people that are not, they hear SpaceX and they understand, there's Starlink and there's rockets getting launched. What's more of the depth of the business model there?
I mean, I think you nailed it. It's reusable rockets is a gigantic moat in the space industry. Literally nobody else is able to do it at scale. I think Blue Origin just did their first ever, but it doesn't really use they use a very different methodology. It's phenomenal that they got there. They're the second company ever, but SpaceX is launching every 2 days. I mean, you have a long way to catch up, and they're about to launch their newest rocket, which is Starship, which is going to take, 100 times more mass to orbit per launch or something like that. So that 100x's your capacity, and the rocket cost might be double, but then you're getting a 50x reduction, right, on a per unit mass to orbit price, basically. And the more you're able to do that, the better. It's fully reusable, et cetera, et cetera. So you get, you have the most often cadence, and then you also have the lowest cost to orbit. So you get a double savings.
I saw an astounding number on the average cost to orbit for SpaceX versus NASA. The difference in price was mind-boggling for me. I'm sure Grok has it if we can pull it up. But that's kind of like where it starts to stand out. And you're like, wow, there's a huge moat here. And then Starlink, is there any real competition for Starlink?
No.
Nothing, right?
Not even close.
Well,
Amazon
the thing with
or
Starlink is you really
Kuiper.
need to launch as many satellites as possible to have a great service. And SpaceX, with their lowest launch cost, it's kind of game over. Nobody else can compete with that. Most of the other satellite services do not have their own rocket. They're launching often on SpaceX. So that becomes pretty tough to compete with long term.
It seems crazy to me. I mean, pull back up that number for a second there, Evan. It was saying
10 to 30.
$2,500. $3,000 for a Falcon 9 launch. That's
Per pound, probably.
Per kilogram, so 2.2 pounds per kilogram. And how big are these things? Ultimately, $43,000 per kilogram for NASA.
Well, it's 10 to 30 times cheaper, so it's going to be a 90 to 98% savings, whatever that is, 90 to 95% savings.
Yeah, 98% cheaper to go with these rockets. So yeah, I mean, that's a huge moat right there.
But it's only because of reusability, right? That's the important factor here, is that every other company, Elon has used this analogy 1,000 times, but imagine how expensive a plane ticket would be if you have to throw away the plane every time you fly it.
Right, I drive my car and then I have to buy a new car when I get there.
Insane. Like, what are we doing, right? That moat, that bring the rocket back thing, is a very difficult engineering challenge, and that's where Elon's his absolute best strength is that he is a magnet for insanely talented engineers because he's a one-of-one engineer. Right. And so that's why they solve reusable rockets. That's why they solve self-driving with cameras. That's why they put chips in people's brains. It's that's the thing. That's why they're trying to make government way more efficient. It's like that systems approach that allows them to have that massive moat.
Omar, would you go to Mars?
I won't be on the first rocket, but once they get things settled there, they got the Hilton, they got Disneyland. Sure, I'll visit. But, I think SpaceX really, if you were to summarize Tesla's doing autonomous electric robots. xAI is building general intelligence. I think for SpaceX right now, it's just reusable rockets, as Farzad said. Starship, if they can just get this to like a Boeing, okay, maybe Boeing's a bad example. Maybe I'll use Airbus as an example.
Yeah.
If they can just get this like an Airbus where it can just take off and land regularly with no issues like clockwork, that's really where they want to go. And if you think about an interplanetary economy where we're doing trade with the moon and Mars, this is going to be a huge component of that economy. I mean, any sort of extraplanetary civilization would depend on this company really for survival at first. You have use cases for Earth orbit, and they've even talked about use cases for traveling across Earth. I mean, how awesome would it be to be able to get to Europe in 30 minutes or Asia, China in 30 minutes? If they can really get the reliability there, that it really becomes like commercial space flight. They've talked about getting the cost of this thing down to a business class ticket, and really just space tourism in general. I mean, I think probably some of us on this podcast will probably eventually go to space for the first time on a Starship.
I'd love to.
Yeah. And that's something we never considered as a kid. But I think that by the time we're retired, it'll be just as common as flying on an airplane.
So you mentioned the first interplanetary franchises there, Hilton and Disneyland. Sawyer, what do they need to have on Mars before you're going there?
Do we have to go there?
A bar.
Yeah,
a beer that I can have when I land.
I would go to Mars. I don't know when, maybe the 2040s or something, but eventually I'd like to go for sure.
How long does it take to get to Mars? It's a while, right?
6
About
months.
6 months. Yeah. So
That's not
that's
bad.
another thing we didn't really touch on is like the next Mars transfer window, which is SpaceX is trying to meet is between October and December of 2026. So Elon's goal is to send a Starship unmanned, uncrewed, to Mars in that window, roughly November, December timeframe. And he wants to, maybe he'll put some Optimuses on there and whatnot.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's their goal for next year. And it's really ambitious, but hopefully they get there.
But I think like that vision is what's so like why it makes it so difficult to stop paying attention to this story, because we're literally talking about there is a significant chance, let's say more than 20% chance, that there is a Starship rocket going to Mars, an purely American company that's going to have humanoid robots that are going to land on Mars. That is the craziest thing of all time, right? And then so that opens the door for so many things. If we can send humanoid robots to Mars using SpaceX rockets, I wonder what we could do at home, right? And that's the conversation that needs to be had in the next 5 years, because that's legitimately what's about to happen.
You know,
not just from Tesla, right?
You know what argument I hate is when people say, "Why are we like trying to go to Mars? We should be solving problems here back on Earth." But like, people don't understand how many technologies humans invented because of our investments in space. Like, go on Wikipedia. There's like a list of like 100 different things. Velcro,
The ballpoint
like
pen?
MRI
Is that one
machines,
of
like
them?
all kinds of Velcro, like
GPS.
Yeah, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, imagine
Solar
life
panels.
without GPS. We're
I
all
would
trying to
literally
figure out
never
where the
get
hell we
anywhere.
are. Imagine trying to make a self-driving car work without GPS satellites.
Yeah,
I
Evan,
also
can you
grew
pull
up
up a
in
list?
I'm in the generation that never used a map. We literally just grew up and we had GPS. So I don't have to know like in my head how to actually get anywhere. We just plug it in, even if it's like 2 blocks away.
Yeah, I've been witness to a lot of fights between my parents. My mom specifically saying, "Where are you going?" My dad's like, "Just trust me." And we don't have GPS. It's like, okay, that I was witness to that, and that was entertaining. At least
I thought
You missed
GPS
out.
was created by the military. That was created, you're saying, by space travel?
Well, it's one of those.
Well, the
frontier
satellites are
technologies.
obviously in space, right?
Right,
So
right.
Yeah.
Well, okay,
you can't
yes,
really
yes.
launch them if you don't have launch capabilities.
If you shoot enough into space, you can make a satellite. They'll come together, and the bullets will come together.
Yeah,
Terrible
Evan,
joke.
I don't know if you can pull up that list on Wikipedia. That'd be interesting to see.
On Grok, bro, come on, what are you doing?
Or Grok, yeah. Actually, Grok would be better because you have to scroll through nonsense on Wikipedia.
Yeah. What are technologies that NASA has created that we use? on a daily basis.
That would be pretty interesting. Just like real quick, circling back, because I think that I've heard occasionally there's people that have ways to get exposure to SpaceX as investors right now. Obviously, there's some private placement rounds. There were some publicly traded stocks that there's been some rumors around, like, oh, this is an exposure play to SpaceX, pieces like that. Have you guys heard those?
Yeah. So the main way for just the average retail shareholder is like the Barron Fund. I think like between 9 and 20% of that fund is SpaceX stock. I think some level of it is Tesla as well. So that's just publicly traded. I forget the ticker, but that's typically how people get some exposure. And then there's like this special purpose vehicle, the SPV route, which is a little bit more difficult. Typically there's minimums, and then there's like high carried interest fees on top of that. So annual management fees often. So that's the more expensive way.
Is there no other logical place to go besides Mars? Is it just like really the only option?
No,
I mean,
any moon base.
Yeah, you can have moon base, you can have Mars, you can explore asteroids, flying around.
But
you
I
can
feel
go to
Occupy Mars is like the slogan. Like, it's literally whole Mars blog. I mean,
Mars is the ultimate quest. Like, we've been to the moon, we haven't been to the Mars yet, and we don't have a base on the moon yet.
Are you sure we've been to the moon, Sawyer?
By the way, that Firefly moon landing mission like 3 days ago was unreal. That was
so sick. There's another one, I think, tomorrow from the name of the company.
Why don't we have a moon base yet? What's going on there?
What's the forcing?
I think we've been focused on the space station, but Mars is really just the closest habitable planet. I think if we can actually set up a city on Mars, it's not going to stop there. It's going to expand to other planets, maybe even other solar systems. And obviously we need dramatically better technology to achieve that. But that's kind of the upside of having bases on the moon, bases on Mars. It becomes a forcing function for that technology to improve. And that's going to have benefits in space and on Earth.
Have you guys seen the movie Ad Astra with Brad Pitt? Mm-hmm. It's Ad Astra means like until the stars, and it's a really interesting concept. It's set, 100 years in the future, and the moon has been colonized. And it's like, what would happen if humanity colonized moon? Well, naturally, we'd all have our own spots, US, Russia, China, and we'd all get into a war on the moon. And so basically, it's like the moon is taken over and everybody has a piece of it, and it's just a giant war going on there. And it's kind of like, what do you guys think? Like, do you think the human tendencies that we have here on Earth just kind of extend out into space?
Of course. But I think so that's such a fascinating question, right? Because it's all right. So there will be a claim for other countries in, like, let's say Mars. Let's say Mars, right? Let's put aside the moon, because the moon is, I don't think anybody actually would want to live on the moon. I think that's probably more like a temporary stay and then you come back. But Mars, there's more potential to stay. Okay. So who can claim the most land? It's the one that can get the most rockets there with the most amount of payload. Is there any other company in the next 5 to 10 years that's going to get anywhere close to the payload capacity of SpaceX? I don't think so. And so what does that mean? Within 5 years, the SpaceX could claim the entirety of Mars. They could just have robots freaking everywhere and rockets everywhere. It's like, at that point, it's okay. So is Mars just a SpaceX? And like, who owns Mars?
I can't imagine the U.S. government wouldn't just step their foot in the door somehow.
Right.
Be like, we want like, a piece of this.
Exactly. You are an American company. We gave you the defense on the land. And then, we collect your taxes. You are, Americans are investing in your company. You hire American workers. Ultimately, America owns Mars, right? It's like,
did any of this get mentioned? I listened to the State of the Union, but I didn't listen to the whole thing. Did any of the Mars stuff get mentioned at all?
Trump said we're going to Mars.
He said we're going to Mars?
Elon was like, yeah.
He said Mars, Greenland, and Panama Canal, baby.
Yeah.
We're taking them all.
Evan, I just DM'd you a screenshot of the Grok 3 list. Can you put that up? That way we can see the tech.
I think the thing about Mars is we've always kind of had this international cooperation in space. I mean, look at the International Space Station. Just on the last launch, we brought a Russian astronaut with us, and we're fully, involved in wars here on Earth. But in space, there's always been the spirit of international cooperation. And I think as you get to Mars and beyond, it's kind of beyond the jurisdiction of the United States. I mean, you have a transfer window every 2 years, and it takes 6 months to get there. What are you going to do if someone breaks the law on Mars? Go send an FBI agent up on a rocket to go arrest them and bring them back to Earth?
We have a Space Force.
Yeah. I mean, it gets kind of impractical and expensive. So I think what you're going to see with Mars and these other planets is they're eventually going to be really self-governed and not a part of the United States. And I think this has been so much of the greatness of the United States is it was a blank slate. Whereas cultures like Europe and China, they get bogged down by cultural tradition, the way things have been. The United States, and especially as they expanded westward into the Western United States, became this frontier for new ideas, new thinking. And we've seen the birth of Silicon Valley and so many other things. That to me is the really exciting thing about space. The ability to come to Mars and kind of just hit reset on society and say, okay, how would we build this today? And people on Earth may have an opinion about it, but they're so far away, there's not much they can do.
Just to confirm, like, we'd have to have, you can't breathe the air on Mars, correct? Is that?
No.
Yeah. So like, what does living look like there for all intents and purposes?
Tunnels and domes.
Yeah, pretty much. Unless
Pumps
you
full
like
of
do some
oxygen.
terraforming or something.
Yeah. It's going to be, it is going to be like a, interstellar, the Martian type situation, right? Where you're going to, the first few 100 years are not going to be fun. They're just, I don't think there's,
First
it's going to be first whatever, I think it's very similar to, it's like a super futuristic version of when the Europeans came to the United States and then, Manifest Destiny kicked in. Yeah. And they're like, yo, let's go expand westward, right? And then people had to deal, well, number one, they are, fortunately, at least as far as we know, there's no other people that were invading on Mars, right? The United States has kind of pretty brutal history when it comes to that. But it's kind of similar to that. So instead of like trying to kick Native Americans out of their land, right, and taking over and then dealing with all those complexities and, new land, you have to build infrastructure, et cetera, instead you're going to fight the habitat of Mars, which is pretty brutal, right? So how long did it take for the Americas to expand and become fully, like, let's say, developed and all that stuff? It took a few hundred years, So it's going to be something similar to that.
How fast can they transmit data back to us?
I think 6 to 8 minutes, I believe.
Okay. So here's my theory. We should turn it into a TV show to fund it. So it's like Survivor or Alone, and we send people up and then they all have GoPros and then they feed that feedback. It gets a TV show. It's pay-per-view. They put it up, giant Netflix thing. And that's how we fund the space travel and how we get people interested in like wanting to go to Mars. Because then all the people who are like the crazies, in the beginning would be like, wow, this show looks cool. And so that's how we start getting people in there. I actually think it could work.
I think it's more than 6 to 8 minutes because it takes light from the time it goes from the sun to Earth. It's like an 8-minute trip. So it's got to be longer from Mars.
Evan, can you look it up? How long does it take for?
It depends on the distance between Earth and Mars, which can vary, but I think it could be, 30 minutes or more in some cases.
Yeah.
That's a good point. You have to go through the sun.
That's going to be amazing. Like, remember in 1969, like 1 billion people or something watched the moon landing together live on TV? Like that moment when we land on Mars for the first time, like with Starship, that's going to be such a special moment.
It's not bad. 12 and a half minutes at the closest.
3 to 22 minutes. Yeah, I mean,
At the
you have a
closest
22-minute delay.
Yeah, that's not
I mean, it
bad
doesn't
at
even
all.
have to be live. It doesn't have to be live. It can be like this podcast, like just send the data, edit it together. I mean, 22-minute delay, big deal. Who cares?
I think it'd be fun. Hey, we've just been using it this entire time. So before we do want to wrap up, I wanted to talk a little about Grok. I feel like the past 2 weeks is the first time that I have started defaulting just completely instead of Google to, some like Evan will ask me questions throughout the day about random stuff. And I'll just be like, I don't know, ask Grok. Like, I'm sure it has the answer kind of thing. And I've really moved there versus Google. And I think ChatGPT is still pretty good too for a lot of stuff. Like I've been like feeding documents into it, like even simple things. Like now that I'm in Puerto Rico, people will send me stuff in complete Spanish and I have just no idea what the document is. I'll email them back with like, do you have this in English? They're like, no. I'll put it into, ChatGPT or Grok and say, just write this in English, and it'll completely translate. And I'll be like, all right, now compare these two documents, and put it in English and stuff like that. But I feel like we're finally getting to the point where AI and, LLMs are overtaking Google, I would say. Do you guys feel the same?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh yeah,
that's
definitely.
the power of live data.
Yeah,
What's
things
the-
that I used to
Yeah.
take to Google, I take to LLMs now.
I just feel like Google is starting to feel inadequate and inaccurate is where I go with it.
Yeah, I think to me, it's like the All-In guys talked about this. The BG2 guys talked about this. Many people have talked about it. It's like the Google is the legacy version of search. You have to sift through links, and then you have to navigate through the ads at the top. You don't even know what the right and then you click on the link. You're like, that's not what I was looking for. And then you click a link, and then you get hit with an ad that says subscribe to our newsletter, and then you click X, and it's like become a subscriber. You click X, and then you realize you can't click X. You're like, shit. Okay, I gotta go find it. It's a mess. It's the worst thing of all time, right? Whereas Grok, GPT, whatever, like Evan, how long does it take to get to the moon or whatever? Blam, here's your answer. Here you go, right? So the monetization aspect, I think that's going to be the biggest variable that we're going to have to see as far as like the shift away from search, and I think that's why when Sundar posted earlier today, Evan, if you want to bring that up, where they said they're actually boosting up their search efforts with Gemini, and basically, I think this is their way of trying to preserve people fleeing search Google and going to LLMs. Is they're trying to like say, here's our product. Yeah. So today we're also introducing our newest lab experiment for search, AI mode. You'll get AI responses using Gemini 2.0's advanced reasoning, thinking multimodal capabilities, plus new ways to explore even more of the web. So I think it will become obvious if this is working on not by just looking at Alphabet's quarterly earnings and seeing if their ad revenue is getting destroyed. And if their ad revenue is getting destroyed, that means that people are moving out of search.
It's a couple things for me. So like one example would be real-time fact checking as well. So now that they have the Grok button on the timeline, so these accounts that just post a clickbait, and someone posted like, oh, this happened today, this crazy thing, and I click the Grok, but it's like that happened a year ago and it wasn't even that crazy. Like this small thing happened. I feel like if I was going to try to go to Google and put that in, I would have gotten like 7 stories. And like you're saying, I would have to click into the article, decipher what they're trying to say. Also, the way that Google is written is because people need to get clicks. It's all written with clickbait, right? It's never like straight to the point kind of thing. It's written in a slightly misleading way. And I'm just curious what you guys think this will affect kind of like the next generation, because even like book reports, right, and research have gone from, okay, I'm going to go to the library and read a bunch of books to try to find this, to like my generation. It's like, okay, we have, Google and these websites with educational articles, and we're going to go and we're going to search through them. And that's doing a book report and citing our sources. And now it's just like, you go to the LM, you're like, write a book report on this and cite all your sources. It seems like everything, like the entire curriculum is going to have to be changed when it comes to learning and education.
100%. Education has been disrupted beyond repair. I shouldn't say that. Education has entered a new phase where the old way of doing education is no longer relevant, because now you have a master information gatherer and master logic thing that is helping you through life. And so within that context, what is the legacy education system really meant to do? Like, how is it helpful, right? So to me, it's like the new education system should be how to best use LLMs, AIs, everything at your disposal to make the best possible decision for whatever you're trying to do.
How to build rockets. Yeah.
Everything.
I mean, I think Farzad hit on a really important point, which is just that the web has become so bloated. It used to be, back in the 90s, you search something, you pull up the web page, the information's there. Now you search, first of all, you're seeing the Google ads. Then you get into the website, they go, hey, please subscribe. Let me throw up a big pop-up ad, a big banner telling you to subscribe. There's a paywall. You're searching for minutes just to find the answer. And with LLMs, that now goes down to seconds. So in the library age, it was hours. Search engines brought that down to minutes. LLMs are bringing that down to nearly instantaneous, nearly as fast as you can ask the question. You can get an answer now.
Even very deep, very complex, very nuanced, pro-con, contentious topics. You just click deep research, deep search, whatever, you type your thing, and within 30 to 90 seconds, you have a dissertation on something that would take probably thousands of dollars and a research team and days to figure out something close to what it's been generated. Even if it's an 80% answer, you got that 80% answer in a minute and a half versus a 80% answer in 2 days and $1,000 worth of research, right?
The other
It's
big
crazy.
thing is that you can train it on yourself, right? So it can remember things about you. I can tell it one time, this is what I do for work and all this stuff. And then it has that context for the future if I need it to write letters for me or address people, things like that, right? Create messages. Did you guys listen to the Joe Rogan Elon pod that just came out? They basically spent like half that podcast just talking to Aura and like laughing at the answers back and forth on Grok. I mean, it's funny because it even like fascinates Elon what they're building in real time. And he's sitting there just kind of laughing and amazed at it and on unhinged mode. And like they're talking back and forth. So it's cool to me because it's to someone like him who's built a lot crazier stuff than I've ever seen. It also fascinates him.
Yeah. It's just groundbreaking technology. I mean, I think the thing I'm really looking forward to is seeing the economic impact and the individual impact and the democratization of tools and knowledge for the common person that we've never had before, right? Like the example I like to use is like this YouTube thing that we do. Nobody can do this 20 years ago. Like you would need a production company, you would need blah, blah, blah. You would need an audience, you would need a network. It's kind of like the music industry back in the day, in the days of vinyl and CDs. You need this entire structure around you that costs a lot of money. You got to know a certain person to get in, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of stuff outside of just skill and merit that would allow you to get into that thing. Now it's like, if you're good on camera and you're able to convey good information, you can be on YouTube and make a bunch of money. Truly. So then the question becomes, what does AI enable for that next generation of person that's going to get a bunch of power to be able to become their best version of themselves? And I think AI's ultimate benefit is going to be the alignment of people's true talents to market demand. Like that's going to become a lot closer together, which means we're going to get an explosion of entrepreneurship in the best case scenario. I think that is the true power of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, it's just going to keep getting crazier and crazier because it's going to continue learning on itself. We're going to hopefully achieve, AGI, ASI, different things like that. So there's a lot of pieces to go into here. We can move into a little bit of wrap up. By the way, for those that are watching or listening, it was quite a week for the Gigacast. We got a nice retweet from Elon himself on a great clip about Sawyer talking about everything being made in America. And same thing there goes for SpaceX, Starlink as well, right? For the most part, created in America, right?
Yeah, Starlink and SpaceX are both
Yes, completely created in America as well. So it was really interesting. Like I even learned stuff from that little clip. So it was great. Our YouTube video, if you're watching on YouTube, by the way, please do go ahead and subscribe to the channel, throw on notifications, like the video, drop a comment. Did almost 10,000 views on that last one, which was great to see a lot of interest in these topics that we're talking about. X did really well as well. So we love to see that. Just want to roll around to you guys, see if you have any final thoughts. Oh, and also if anybody's, watching on the amazing channels that Farzad and Omar have on YouTube, feel free, you could check out the Gigacast, likely linked below. If you want to see the rest of our previous videos that have come out. I don't think all of them are on those channels. And so, yeah, with that being said, Omar, any final comments in regards to SpaceX, Mars travel, Hilton's on Mars, Grok, anything like that?
Yeah. You know what? As we're airing this, we just saw the latest Starship launch. We don't know what happened yet, but it's certainly an exciting time for SpaceX, for XAI, for Tesla. I think the most exciting moment in all of these companies' histories. And Apple had an announcement today. They did a new MacBook Air. It's blue. And that's also one of my favorite companies. It used to be, I think, one of my most innovative companies that I used to really love their products. I still do. But that's the difference between Elon's companies and the other Mag 7 companies. Other companies like Apple, they make great products. Elon's companies make human history. The scaling of autonomous robots, space travel, artificial general intelligence. It's in a different league than I think, Google updating their search engine, or Apple doing a blue MacBook. And that's why they're so fun to follow.
Yeah, I love how you put that. You're like, Apple's big news today. We have it in blue as well. Of course, they said they were building specifically for Apple Intelligence, which is not very intelligent yet, but we'll see. It'll get there.
Can we?
It sucks, let's be honest.
Dude, like, can we make maybe? I think there needs to be an entire episode like figuring out how to fix Apple. It's such a shame that such an incredible company that was so innovative is so obviously going down the wrong path. And it's so painful to see. It hurts.
You think they should?
I mean, I wouldn't even say they're going down the wrong path, but they're just in maintenance mode. They're not bringing that next generation forward, which is what we love them for. And I think we all know what the solution is. Sell Apple to Elon. He'll get them putting out some crazy shit and really quick.
I mean, that's not a bad idea.
Start working on the chip. Combined with
we need to get Elon 3 trillion.
It'll be the Neurophone. It'll just be the newest product from between the two of them. Stick it in your head. You've got everything.
My fantasy is after Optimus, Tesla buys them. That would be my dream come true.
What's that meme with the astronaut behind him? He's like, it was always all Tesla. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's again, talking about like the doors that get opened, like, you know, the rocket sending the human robots to Mars opens a lot of doors for the imagination and viable business opportunities. But like in a world where Tesla does have human robots, it's very likely to be like the market leader, the best neural nets, the best brain, the best actuators, the largest volume, right? The TAM it's going to enter, it's roughly 40 trillion globally. And that's with today's human labor. And since you can manufacture robots, and it's much harder to manufacture humans because, you know, we got to have fun to do that. It seems like not a lot of people are having fun lately, which is a shame. That market expands vastly, right? So if you're able to enter a $40 trillion market and you're able to capture just 10% of that, that's 4 trillion, and you put some sort of multiple on the profits you make on that, all of a sudden you have a ballooning market cap that puts you 2, 3x, 4x above Apple in the long term. So like that it sounds like a dream, but it's like, what kind of marriage exists between Apple and Tesla long term? There's probably a lot of marriages that make a lot of sense. And it's a possibility in the future, as long as the human to robot ends up being useful, and I'm pretty confident it will be.
Yeah, and you know, Apple, they've tried to copy or do similar things to Tesla multiple times and scrap those products. So it seems like they're inclined to do things that Tesla wants to do. So there could be a lot of overlap there. Maybe that's another episode here on the combinations between not just Apple and Tesla, but major companies and Tesla and where the synergies exist. Sir, you got any other general thoughts?
Not really, other than this loud ass leaf blower outside my window right now.
I can hear that.
It's been going the whole episode. And I've just been trying to stay muted as long as possible.
I can hear that now.
They always show up at the right time.
Yeah. I'll just say it'll be interesting to see how the public IPO market potentially changes under the Trump administration, and with Elon having Trump's right ear and the SEC having a new head. You never know how the regulations and rules might change to where it would potentially become a more favorable environment for SpaceX to IPO than it is right now. We'll see.
And then Texas is getting a new stock market thing. Aren't they getting a
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Another thing too?
I mean, that would be a hot IPO. I think we can all agree on that.
Oh yeah. Giant.
I'd be curious, what do you guys think? Like, would a lot of Tesla investors sell some of their Tesla to buy SpaceX, or would it just be a net like on top of their Tesla?
I would consider selling some of my Tesla for SpaceX.
See, I think a lot of people would. So it would potentially, at least temporarily, affect the valuation of Tesla.
Yeah.
Not that it matters long term, but
I think both. I mean, that's such a fascinating question. That could be a whole other episode. Yeah. Ideally, I would just want to back up the truck into SpaceX and just remain my Tesla. Or keep all my Tesla, but at the same time, I'm like, man, like I've had this thing since 2012. Like, maybe it makes sense to shift a little bit into the SpaceX.
I think there would be a lot of debate in the community, be like, what has like the higher long-term potential? Is it SpaceX? Is it Tesla? Because if you go to Mars, like you could think of all kinds of scenarios of money generating businesses, but then on the Optimus opportunity is insane too. So yeah, be interesting.
I think they're both nuts. It's like such a win-win question.
All right. Well, I
You
got
know?
one last question. Do you guys think that the US dollar will be the currency of Mars?
No. Elon Bucks or
Yeah.
Dogecoin.
Elon Bucks.
Probably, yeah.
Probably.
EB, baby. Very fun. Everybody, I hope you came away from this, like I did, more educated on everything going on around space, SpaceX, Starlink, IPOs, so much more to go on in this area. You can obviously do deeper research using Grok. If you care to learn more, it's got plenty of answers for you, but I think this was a great place to get started, and I hope you enjoyed it. As always, we'll be back next week. Like, follow, subscribe, throw up a prayer for us, whatever you got to do. We'll see you on the next one. Take care, everybody.